Hi everyone. I wanted to make a deck tech video for my experience at the Grand Tournament at the, what is it called? Gamers Guild Arizona store down in Phoenix that was hosted this year, that had an Equinox endorsement, not Equinox support, but they did have some official gifts there and a very full staff for a major event. Major is a sliding scale. This event had 52 players, so it was a much smaller event than several events going on in France, much smaller than most events. Most events that people are traveling from this radius would be a little larger, but the game is still growing. It just started. So 53 was a great showing, a great amount of people. And a lot of the people who were there were very enthusiastic about the game. Even the locals I spoke to, where, you think maybe that 53 number could be padded out by people who didn't have to drive far to compete in the tournament. They seem so excited about the game and the community that they're building in Arizona. So I think I'm very optimistic about the growth of this game. And I hope if you're somehow watching this video and you haven't already joined in, that you feel inspired to join in. Hope I can show that there's a lot of strategy in the game. So at my tournament, I chose a hero, Waru Mac. Waru Mac was a very popular pick at this tournament. He had 13 participants, while Finn had 10, which is almost as high. Some people like to note that Sigismar also tends to be popular, and Sigismar shares a faction with Waru, while the other two heroes in Finn's faction do not have a lot of popularity. So when you combine those two with some of their overlapping cards, you feel more of a presence. But without the overlap, they were somewhat close. My process for deciding I wanted to play Waru was that I felt that Waru is definitely one of the strongest things in the game. And even if that assessment is slightly off, very likely to be very, very popular. So I wanted to either be able to beat Waru or play Waru. I think you should always heavily consider playing the best deck. It may feel like, in this case, it's 1 out of 18 options. It's like, is it a 1/8 out of 18th chance that you'll like the one who's coming out on top? But it's often you can find things that you like about any particular game plan, and that's definitely true for me. Waru was like in the top 5 heroes that I was excited about, maybe, but there was like my top 3 that I wanted to try to see if they could beat Waru first. So one of those I tried was Subhash, which has a very, very strong mechanic against Waru, because Subhash can pay the Robin Hood tax once per turn by using his ability. But I felt like Subhash was not generically powerful, and the Trace matchup for Subhash is very, very poor. I think you're really struggling there. And Trace was reasonably popular at this tournament. A few people played him, and Trace is a very powerful deck. I didn't go in order of preference because the one I tested the most was Rin and Orchid, the Lyra Festival strategy. And that strategy was very appealing to me because it ignores the number of tokens that Waru is producing, or the number of charges he plays in the games where you are able to pull off the festival. And there aren't like extra permanent removals or anything in what Waru is doing. Sometimes you even see people go below 3 sticky seal scrolls. I chose to play 3. But that is why I really wanted to give Rin a shot. I tested her a whole lot, and I felt like too often Waru just wins even on your good draws. Robin Hood and removal can both be leveraged to keep the Lyra Festival from triggering. And he has a lot of good stats to keep you from threatening the advancement win. Maybe if I kept working with it, I could work on threatening the advancement win better with some of the cards I wasn't considering. But by the time the tournament was coming up close, I felt like it made more sense to switch. Another character that I thought about playing was Taja because I'd played so many games with Rin, and she shares a faction with Rin. And I do think Taja has, I think, like the second best matchup against Waru after Subhash. I haven't really explored Subhash enough. I might have like a false, bloated impression of what Subhash can do against Waru. So maybe Taja's is even better. The main reason I didn't go with Taja is that I don't really like Taja. I like Waru a lot better than Taja. I like the anchored mechanic, and I guess I like the cards that Waru uses to anchor, like Sandman. They just kind of appeal to me a little bit more than the ones Taja tends to use. Like Taja uses Moonadruid. I think a lot of Taja lists will use meditation training. Sometimes some people say that's a cut. Cone Man, I think Cone Man is a very solid way to play Taja that some people play, but it's just not as exciting to me as like when you sleep a little Ortis Attorney and there's still a 2/2 there next turn. It's what excited me more. So I would say those were all the ones that I heavily considered. So you can see my matchups here. I put out a hero card for every single matchup I played. Several of these are, or two of these are the same opponent twice. I played two of the Warriors that I played in Swiss again in the cut. So it looks like more people with Waru than it actually was, but it was a lot of matches with Waru because those two particular Waru players were successful. Waru is obviously an even matchup for Waru. It's often a snowbally matchup where the first player to resolve a Robin Hood, and if that Robin Hood sticks, is going to be able to continue to play the cards they want to play, be able to keep their hand full instead of depleted. I guess your hand does end up full if you're getting Robin Hooded, your hand is also full. But generally, if you have a board advantage with a Robin Hood, you're able to play Ozma even on a lane where its stats aren't perfect. So just establishing a Robin Hood often snowballs that matchup. It doesn't always do that. But that really helped me out when I felt some of my uniques were a little weaker than some other players, is that since Amir was so focused around that dynamic, it made it less important where the 2-0 unique blowouts were, or maybe what some of the other unique abilities were doing. And some of my uniques do imitate the rare and support the core Robin Hood strategy. My Sandman does that. The Baba Yaga I borrowed does that to a little extent. And then whatever I freed up the rare point with Quetzalcoatl for was also doing that. So I appreciated that the mirrors were kind to me in that regard. Kojo and Buddha, I think, is not much of a challenge for Waru. The problem with Kojo and Buddha is that the removals and Bravos need to be used late, and Robin Hood demands a response early. And it's a little tricky to get around that. Most people will say to just use Intimidation, and the Robin Hood will cost 4 next time. But guaranteeing your opponent has the next Robin Hood instead of being any other faction and hoping there's not a second one is really a good bit weaker. Kojo and Buddha is definitely the Bravos hero I'm the most scared of. But naturally, I won that match. If you don't already know the result, I won all the matches except for this one in finals, which gave me second place. Sigismar on Wingspan is a very good hero against Waru, although I still would prefer the Waru seat. It puts you in a really awkward spot to decide whether to keep Sticky Seal Scrolls for permanent developments or whether to mana it and then risk having trouble with big boards. I did lose one game because I managed Sticky Scrolls and wish I hadn't. And then I also had some hands that were pretty uncomfortable because I was keeping Sticky Seal Scrolls in them. There's also the dynamic of some Sigismar lists just not having the sticky targets at all. The appealing thing about playing Sigismar in a Waru heavy meta is Sigismar is great against everyone. So I'm not surprised that I was playing one at 2-0. I played a Waru here that I did pretty well against. I played a Teja and Nara that was towards the end of the Swiss. As I mentioned earlier, Teja and Nara I think is one of the best counters to Waru that we know about right now. Like more workshopping and more development in lists might reveal some things later. I think as more and more people stop playing decks that have certain strategies that have no hope of winning against Waru, you open up more and more opportunities to use certain cards that normally wouldn't be good that are really good against Waru. And I don't think Teja needs to wait for that to happen as much as some other heroes like Subhash. Subhash kind of needs to wait for that to happen in some regards. Or at least I hope so. I'm a Subhash fan. So Teja Nara wins by having great 4-drops, because a 4-drop is a great way to pay the Robin Hood tax once while doing something that's good. And her 4-drops don't overkill because they're lasting until the next turn. They're either the Aloe Vera or the Cone Man. The Cone Man doesn't resupply and gets hit by Sticky Seal Scrolls, but he's still a really good option, and he's better stats too. I don't remember whether this player played Cone Man actually. So that was my closest. It was the closest match of the entire tournament. Like all my other wins were more comfortable than that. And if you've seen, I guess this might come out before the finals video, but the finals was pretty lopsided. So this was the closest of my wins. My second game, I actually went to tiebreakers, and I actually had to sleep a bureaucrat into tiebreakers, which is very, very tense. It's very tense to like sleep a bureaucrat and know your opponent could 2-0 you and just end the game because you slept it. But I did barely win that set. This Waru and Mac is the same as the finalist. The first time we played in Swiss, I won. Those were some really good games. It was a 2-1 set, so I'm not just saying that because like I stomped or anything. I wish those were videoed, but you do have some interesting decision points in the finals too. Fen and Crowbar was my first match in the cut. Fen and Crowbar is an up-and-coming Waru counter. She's winning a lot of games against Waru, and then she does really well against the field because her core hero ability is really strong, and Lyra has a lot of strong cards. I feel a little bit happy about how I was guessing the strength of the heroes early on, because I was a little bit high on Lyra relative to some people, and it's panned out in a lot of ways. Figuring out which commons to not play, I think, has like really been improving the quality of Lyra decks really fast. I do think Fen and Crowbar is a little more overrated as a counter to Waru than Teja and Nara is. A lot of Fen and Crowbar's axis of attack against Waru and Mac is to deplete him of resources, like hand resources, and often to land a lot of cloth cocoons that are kind of optional for whether Waru and Mac wants to eat them. There's a lot of sequencing choices, and I haven't like explored them all. Maybe like when I explore all the branching paths, it turns out it just is really good for Fen and Crowbar. But I think a lot of the play patterns that people aren't considering right away can often lead for Waru and Mac to win when he would otherwise lose. For example, you might like sleep your worst bureaucrats over and over again because Fen just resupplied a cloth cocoon, and if her hand is awkward where she can't empty her reserve, she has to start discarding really good cards to keep from playing the cloth cocoon. You could also play Robin Hood late and miss some of your taxes so that cloth cocoon won't be a legal play until he's awake. I think that's a pretty counterintuitive play, and I'm not sure how frequently it's being implemented. One of my friends pointed out that seemed to be being implemented in one of the late matches in Angers, and I have tried it occasionally. I think it's not always clear that that's stronger than just forcing the cloth cocoon. I especially like forcing the cloth cocoon if you have the second Robin Hood ready. One example of that kind of attrition gameplay that is really interesting in the Fen and Crowbar matchup, and I think it's worth discussing so much because these were the two most popular decks, is that during finals, I had a hand where my opponent resupplied the unique fleeting ability, or the unique support ability, that says all characters your opponent control gain fleeting. And my hand was Robin Hood, Teamwork Training, and I was on 5 mana orbs, and I had a Robin Hood in play. And I looked at that hand and I tanked, and I just realized that I could probably win a lane with the Robin Hood. I think it was like an amount of mana where there probably wasn't the right stats to just beat the Robin Hood awake. I could also play the Robin Hood asleep and then double tax the next turn and have a 3/2/2 next turn. But I just really, really respected Fen and Crowbar's ability to deplete Warrior of Resources. And I just passed on 5 whole mana. And predictably, the Fen and Crowbar just assumes that that's like 2 sticky Seal Scrolls in hand, right? That's like a really reasonable guess. Doesn't like try to save the fleeting ability for next turn to hit them both. That would be a really counterintuitive play. So then the fleeting got popped to get rid of the Robin Hood. I guess it was awake, so also you have to do it then. You can't wait around anyway. Yeah, so once that fleeting ability was gone, I was at less risk of running out of cards. One of my uniques is specifically for that attrition battle against Fen and Crowbar. We'll see that later. This was another match against the same warrior from Swiss. I guess I'll make a couple comments about the deck. It had Meadow in it. I think Meadowless builds do a little bit better than having the Meadow. I think he may have mentioned that he had very few Meadows because it was just to support a unique. But the game he drew Meadow, and I took an advancement that turn. I felt pretty good about it. And there also was an Isatok in that matchup where I don't play Isatok. I think Isatok is slightly worse than replacement level in the mirrors, and possibly in the meta in general, just because it creates a loss condition. And it definitely creates win conditions, especially against some cards that are hard to deal with, like Hydrocana. But I think on balance, it's not quite good enough. It really feels like the rare would be good enough if it was the common. Very common feeling and altered. And then in finals, I played against Warrior and Mac. It was a very, very strong deck and a very good player. I did not see many egregiously wrong plays or unambiguously wrong plays. Only a few things I wouldn't have done, and then I'm sure I did several things wrong too. So I feel like both finalists were pretty solid players. Didn't really think about the phrasing of that, but it felt like as I went through the tournament, stronger and stronger Warrior and Mac players were kind of getting featured in my matches. So let's go into the list. So I wanted to break this down in a way that would be pretty digestible, even if you aren't already familiar with Warrior and Mac and are looking to swap a little bit of the choices. So I broke it out into 4 sections, and those 4 sections are usually the order in which you play the cards, but it's also the rules in which you play the cards. And if you need to play a certain role after a different role for different reasons, there's kind of some conceptual overlap, but I think it mostly makes sense as a good way to explain this archetype. So first, I'm going to lay out the day 1 plays. I do not have as much real estate as I hoped. We'll make it work. Okay. So first we have, well, let's say that first we have Monolith Legate. Monolith Legate is a character that you can sleep on day 1 and then play an awake 1-drop for an advancement. Playing an asleep character day 1 and then playing an awake 1-drop means that you have a good position in the next turn. You get the free token that War really likes. That free token is generally going to be better than taking an advancement immediately, even if War Legate doesn't trigger. Because it establishes presence in both lanes, usually. Occasionally you just shore up one lane and that's a correct play. But oftentimes it establishes a presence in both lanes on that second turn, and that asks a lot of your opponent. So we have the Ortis Attorney, which is also used for those openings where you would love to play a sleeping 2-cost bureaucrat and then also play an awake 1-cost character to win an unopposed lane or sometimes win an opposed lane. Another advantage to just sleeping as a default play on turn 1 is that you do have several cards in the deck that trigger off of you having several characters in play. And so you're keeping those on. Sometimes you don't even have those in your hand yet, so you don't know that those are relevant. But you're rarely going to get punished where you get fewer advancements than you otherwise would have if you adopt a 1 advancement, 1 sleeper approach. So I would usually recommend that when you play the deck if you weren't already going for that. Here we have Frog Prince. Frog Prince is very special because he can be an awake character who advances unopposed on day 1. And he can also be the asleep character that you're keeping for day 2, although it's a little bit more of a gamble. And that can be paired with a character that is forced to be awake. So if you only have an Orders Trooper or you only have one of these forced awake 2-drops, you're still able to do the 1 advancement, 1 sleeper. And of course, sometimes 2 advancements is not a great plan because your opponent has a good enough presence in one of the expeditions that that's not an option. Although against Boromir specifically, you usually could get 2 advancements if you would like them. And I did play lots of Boromir specifically. Let's read what this Baba Yaga does. It's with the Ortis Cadets because it has the same stats as Ortis Cadets, and most of the time I was playing it just like an Ortis Cadets. At dusk, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, draw a card. That's before you discard down your reserve, so it will make you discard a lot of your reserve. And you can discard it to make the next card you play this afternoon cost 1 less. This is a unique I borrowed last minute for the event. I think this unique is not great. It is okay. A 2-drop with decent stats is a category of card that is already in the deck. And it draws a card which is really important for being consistent if you're just not getting key pieces. It's good to have the option to do that early. And it can be really useful against Fen and Crowbar. This is unique that had Fen and Crowbar in mind that I mentioned earlier. Because although you often are discarding a card from reserve when you use the ability to draw a card, usually you discard a card from reserve that's really small, and then you're able to draw a card that's pretty big, and then you fight the attrition war really well. So after day 1, these cards continue to be relevant. Let's make some more comments about the way they work in the deck. Monolith Legate is really important because a lot of the best decks in the format right now have the Anchor 3 or less ability. And that really puts Sabotage at a premium because that ability is really powerful. And it is generally more powerful than the other cards in their deck. Oftentimes, and I love about Ren that this isn't true about Ren, but for everyone else, either they have trouble getting it into reserve or they spent a rare point. In Fen and Crowbar, they usually spent a rare point beyond the first 3 copies. And then in Tasia, the cards that got into reserve with the ability weren't the cards they were excited to play. It's like they exerted some effort and are trying to get to play the good half. So Sabotage is really powerful. This is also just like so good in the mirror if you can play this asleep when Robin Hood is going home, because then the Robin Hood is gone. That's like huge and massive, and the reason you would never consider playing 2 of these. Rare Ortis Trooper is something I saw in the French list. I did not do it on my own when I was building, but I tried it and it's really good. I know we had a lot less Sigismar at this tournament than they did at some of the events in France, and the way Ortis Trooper lines up specifically against a 1/1/1 token is really appealing. But you kind of don't need some of the other rare point spends. And this does some things you can't otherwise do. It can give you, as long as you're in one of the half of the biomes where this is a 1 mana 2/2, it's kind of like a 2 mana 2/2/2 with a bonus, and the bonus is that it's cheaper. And a 2 mana 2/2/2 is like a kind of thing that Waru would really like. Waru really likes to just flip a lane and be ahead in that lane, and then wait and see if he gives up and sleeps stuff or just bid a little more himself, because it has great draw to keep on playing these small characters and keep forcing just small raises. And that's what is really exciting about these kinds of cards. It's exciting about Frog Prince 2, and I did like even consider the vanilla Monolith Runescribe himself, because it's really good at doing that, and it does that in all 3 biome categories unrestricted. So Ortis Cadets does the flip a lane by a slight amount and see what they do thing. The reason you do play it over Monolith Runescribe in the end is, for one thing, Ortis Attorney kind of shows up and has those stats for you if you really need them. The other thing is that having extra bodies, even if you're not charging, because my list only has 1 charge, even if you're not charging, there's some extra utility because extra bodies are more resilient to removal because you have to pick one to remove. And it does turn on your teamwork training. And it also lets you Sandman a Fragment, which is a play that will come up sometimes, is to just pick one of the Ortis Cadets tokens and put 2 boosts on it. And it's just not, you don't need that small amount of stats to win that turn. And so you can invest in the next turn instead of having to play to the board this turn. Ortis Attorney is one of the best cards in the deck because it can continue to draw you cards throughout the game, and you can often do some like extra, more painful manipulation to get an extra card out of her if you like really need to draw a card. Just by like committing to the other lane, even if it would take you more cards to win that other lane. Sometimes it's the kind of stuff that's going on with her. So she is always good to draw, and one of the cards you should be thinking about not mulliganing away against Fen for sure. Oh, I guess I should... Is there room to leave them all out? I'll put them all out at the end. So next, let's go over. This is what I have as category 2. It is Robin Hood and Robin Hood Arms Race cards. The timing when you play these cards is not day 2. It is day 2 if you have Robin Hood, and then, day 2 if your opponent has played a Robin Hood. But as soon as you draw Robin Hood, and in general, you want to participate in the Robin Hood or Robin Hood arms race. Oops. That's obviously, when I say arms race, I'm discussing two mirrors, where you would like to remove your opponent's Robin Hood and be the only player who has Robin Hood in the mirrors. The mirror is very important right now and probably will continue to be important. Sometimes when you have discussions about a mirror, it continues to be true about other decks. And I think in this case that is kind of true about Order Spy, but not really exactly true about Sticky Seal Scrolls. Order Spy is really good at sabotaging those anchor 3 or less abilities that we mentioned earlier for the Legate. And there's a tendency for the first few sabotages you add to your deck to be really good, to have the opportunity to just remove specific cards that are key to your opponent's strategy, even if you're not able to play so much sabotage that your opponent runs out of things to play. So Order Spy is still pretty good in the deck. As mentioned earlier, the way the deck functions often wants to establish small leads. It doesn't really need to create so much stats in a particular lane that you're guaranteed a 1/1. So we're not really too upset that Order Spy is a disappointing 2/2/2. It can, once we have enough mana to be playing an Order Spy, it's like, okay, well, that's what passes for a body around these parts, is a 2/2/2. Robin Hood, you want to play asleep and as early as possible. And occasionally, if your opponent has a very bad hand, you'll somehow brick all their plays and 2-0 them the turn he's sleeping, but that's very unlikely. But you will definitely 2-0 the next turn. And if you don't, well, not definitely, you'll likely 2-0 the next turn, but if you don't, the freedom you have to continue sleeping even more characters is probably going to get you a 2-0 the next turn. He just has a lot of strength, and the earlier you get him out, the less likely it is that there's some way for your opponent to combine their cards to still be better than your cards, even with attacks. That may not always be true. I think depending on the composition of the deck, it could be true that a late Robin Hood taxes more mana because there is more of that mana. However, if you just play your Robin Hood as soon as you see it and don't save it, if you are so fortunate as to draw another Robin Hood, you are able to play it immediately, and that's pretty important. You can't play 2 Robin Hoods if you don't play the first one. The exception to all of this is some nuanced situations where you maybe want to play Robin Hood asleep against Fen, and then, or not asleep against Fen, safe from Cloth Cocoon against Fen. And also there's the aspect of going second, and do I play the Robin Hood going second, or wait until the day where I'm going first and play Robin Hood asleep? I say that it depends on how your mana is curving out. If the only way to curve out your mana is to play a Robin Hood that's missing taxes on the first play, I would generally just play the Robin Hood and focus on curving out mana and getting all of your cards out as efficiently as possible. Because if you're floating mana playing something like Thoth asleep instead of Robin Hood asleep because you want to play Robin Hood asleep the next turn and then float another mana because you don't have an Orders Trooper to go with it, you're kind of taxing yourself those same taxes you missed, and it's just going to be a more consistent outcome to just get what you can right now. If you have a great Quetzalcoatl plus Frog Prince hand, and then like you can see, or you can, even if you don't see a 2-drop, you can reasonably expect a 2-drop on the next turn. If you're going, say you were going into 6 mana, like it's fine to delay and try to go first if your curve is good and you're happy with it. I think both lines are worth considering as the There's a summary there. So here we have mid-game, maintaining the steam. These are cards that you do play day one when the thing that we wanted to do day one didn't pan out. You also play Quetzalcoatl kind of in the Robin Hood role in the Fen matchup and sometimes the Trace matchup specifically. In those specific matchups, he has this weird effect of like generating so many 1/1/1s that he just has kind of the same power level as Robin Hood. I've deeply pondered whether you should mana orb Robin Hood to keep Quetz against Fen. You probably should. It's crazy. So Thoth here, this Thoth rare. Well, let's talk about Thoth in general. Thoth is the bureaucrat that is the most expendable, and he kind of ends up having this role where he performs like the cadets and is often the waking character. So when you're playing the game, I recommend trying to think of him that way. Like it doesn't matter that much if you don't use his sleep effect. If you can just find a Forest Mountains place for him to be at, he's probably going to be excited about that because you only miss one token. Quetz also only makes one token, but Quetz also denies possibly a card your opponent wants to play in their hand. Ozma is like the best card in the game, besides Robin Hood, I guess, but Ozma is the best in more decks. She's absolutely incredible. Very, very rarely I will pitch her when I have specifically a tourney to do what she does instead. That's very important to keep your hand full, especially in the matchup where you know you need to keep your hand full. Because she's mountain polarized, she encourages you to think about what's going on in the mountain specific spaces. So try to think about that. She's very good for giving you a good turn 2, because sometimes you need to go 2+2. And if you slept a bureaucrat turn 1, she'll always turn on from the other 2-drop, even if that 2-drop isn't cadets. This rare Thoth is a mistake. I think this was a mistake on the day. The thinking behind this rare Thoth is that if you play rare Thoth asleep against Wario, on day 2, you will have 2 tokens from the failure to advance, 1 token from Wario's ability, and Thoth himself, which is 4 characters, and that makes you eligible to teamwork training and opposing Robin Hood, even if you couldn't find Sticky. I think this is going too deep. It's kind of weird logic because it means that you didn't have the 1+2, and it's kind of a lose slower strategy, because if you had to play Thoth turn 1 asleep instead of a 1+2, and your opponent Robin Hooded you, if both those things are true, then we're losing. So this rare is kind of investing a way for us to lose slower in games we're losing. Because if we don't have the spy to follow up this line that I'm talking about, where you start with Thoth and then you teamwork training the Robin Hood, you're just still dead. You spent an entire rare point on this Thoth to just die anyway because you didn't find the spy. There's going to be a lot of lists that have more than 1 copy of Charge, or have uniques with the Charge effect, or have, I don't know, what else is there? A 1x copy of the Monolith. I think we saw that in one of the French lists. Those are some fun reasons to value tokens highly enough that Rare Thoth becomes the right call. But I really regret this choice. Another problem with this choice is, like I mentioned, how great it is to play Thoth Awake, because you'll have an easier time playing your other characters asleep earlier on, and he'll kind of end up being the one who was ready to sleep if you needed him to, but now he's ready to be awake and be a good mid-sized character because your deck is full of these 2-drops and 1-drops. So he's this bridge glue character that has 3/3. And that's 2-cost Frog Prince in some lists, but I really, really, really recommend 1-cost Frog Prince. It is so good. 2 stats is just enough so much of the time. If you can manipulate the game into the right biomes really well, you can make him a 2/2/2 so often. And the consistency of having all sorts of different opening hands and being able to have the Sleeping Frog Prince with the waking 2-cost character is just so important. That's probably the creative choice in this deck that I feel the strongest about. Here we have the rare or unique Quetzalcoatl. When an opponent draws 1 or more cards or does resupply, create an Ortis token in your other expedition, not any expedition you want like a normal Quetz. Which is very disheartening because I wanted to one day find a time when I could intentionally lose an expedition with the token and make an attorney not draw a card. But that doesn't actually happen anyway, as much as I wish it did. Unfortunately, the second time you play him, he costs 5. He has a support ability, create a 1/1 soldier token in any expedition, which kind of like bails you out of how bad this second play of the Quetzalcoatl is. Even to the extent that 4/4/4 is kind of defensible stats, it's just so adverse to what warrior decks are trying to do to play a 5-cost character like this that you always bail out with this recruit a soldier token. I think this is a little worse than the rare. Maybe it's on par with the rare. Maybe it is a little better than the rare, but it is not a unique that I was excited to have, but I was relieved to have one that, like, it feels like you're replacing a rare for sure. Like, now you can go spend a rare somewhere else. You're not worried about your Quetzalcoatl costing 4 for the first play. That's not going on. You'll probably be able to do something with the 1/1 token. So all that is fine. The big fear with running this card is if this card is in your opening hand against Fen and you don't have a regular Quetzalcoatl against Fen, you feel so bad because you would so much prefer to play Quetzalcoatl twice. You'd love to pay 3 for a Quetz and then play 3 for a Quetz again against Fen because it's so strong against her. So our last category of cards is cards that close out games. And we have Teamwork Training, Charge, and Sandmans. Teamwork Training can be used in that medium phase where you're just like keeping up. It can even be used as a turn 1 play, especially against Buddha, if you need to. But it's here because it's usually going to do like crazy stuff in a late game role. That's when you're more likely to have the X value be higher. Oops. That's when you're going to be more likely to have the X value be higher. It's also when you have more and more capacity to play like Ortis Trooper, Ozma, Ortis Trooper, and then wait for your opponent to finally have to commit to anchoring something and then Teamwork Training that, that kind of thing. And it's also when you're more and more comfortable with any kind of lack of card economy that Teamwork Training might be causing. Earlier in the game, you might have to mana zone this just because the card economy of it isn't good. It's a fleeting spell. So if you are mana zoning either Teamwork Training or Ozma and you don't have an attorney, don't know where your next dinner is coming from, don't know how you're going to keep drawing cards, you may not be able to keep this. It may be something that you draw again late in the game and you're closing things out. Charge is really good at building up one really big lane to like force through a final 1-1 if you're ahead. And it can also create a final 2-0 if you are in the standard Waru position of being one advancement behind and not wanting to play tiebreakers, because tiebreakers are really bad for Waru, because if he used his ability to get into, he usually didn't use his ability to get into tiebreakers, because usually using your ability to get into tiebreakers can result in your opponent doing everything they can to make the game not tiebreakers, to make it that they beat you. So then you end up going into tiebreakers without your ability, and you don't have the token, and then all your characters don't have text boxes in tiebreakers. They're all about what happens next turn. So I hopefully that makes sense. So charge keeps you out of tiebreakers. It could be really good in tiebreakers, but that might depend on you like having some cards like cadets in your hand, because you probably didn't play a sleeping sloth to get into tiebreakers. It's mostly a card that keeps you out of tiebreakers. Sandman very much can be part of that mid-game, keeping the marathon going, and it can be even part of the Robin Hood arms race if you are sleeping a Robin Hood, because your opponent like sabotaged the first one, and now you have this other one, and you're afraid if that one goes to reserve, that one will get sabotaged too. You can sleep it, especially against Monolith Legate. You can sleep a Robin Hood that was marked for death by a Monolith Legate, and then suddenly it's not going to get sabotaged by the Monolith Legate ability. But then that's not enough reason for him to be in the deck on his own, I don't think. I haven't lived in that world. The fact that he just completely eliminates a character the last turn of the game, because you don't have to worry about the character waking up, is the main thing. Let's look at the unique. This is the best unique in my deck. He says you may sacrifice a character. If you do, up to one target character gains a sleep. And that's an arrow where the regular Sandman has a hand. So that means you're getting to do it twice. And like we just mentioned, he can play both roles. He can be part of the mid-game endurance, because you can sleep your own Ortis Attorneys, you can sleep your own Robin Hoods, and you can keep the fight going. Like you keep your board presence using the Bureaucrat abilities and Waru's ability. And then you can use him again to do that closeout thing. The support ability here, unlike the Quetzalcoatl, is just not very interesting, not ever used. I think I used it maybe one time, but that second arrow ability is so powerful. That's what you really prefer. Occasionally you miss the 2 counters, but usually the turn of the game where you are playing a Sandman, a second Sandman is just way better than the 2 boosts that the regular Sandman would give you. All of these uniques that were in my deck were from what I pulled from about, I pulled 2.5 cases of sealed products because I wanted to support the Kickstarter lot, because I'm really excited about the game. But I did not have a singles budget. I borrowed the Baba Yaga. The Baba Yaga is like a slight upgrade from some other cards I have. I borrowed that from a friend who's opened like, I think 4 boxes. I have to give it back to him in a couple days. But I wanted to mention that Waru is a really good character, or a really good hero to play if you don't have a lot of uniques, because I don't think he's super dependent on his uniques. The best uniques are better. You'll definitely find an appreciable number of games that you could not have won without specific uniques, if you have specific uniques in Waru, and that goes for any deck. But I think he's less impacted by that than a lot of other heroes, because you can already snowball the game using Robin Hood, using Sabotage to eliminate your opponent's uniques that you don't have a way of beating with, hey, my unique is even bigger. It also helps that you don't have to go into, like I said, the mirror is snowbally, and I think the mirror being snowbally makes having weaker uniques way easier to work with. And I think that all of his matchups have a lot of creativity and a lot of ways to develop different game plans based on what you have to work with. So I think like your bad uniques are less bad. Like whatever they do, I don't know what yours are. There may be some cool stuff that you can do with them to sculpt a warrior game plan that no other deck could do, even if you couldn't list it and it would be obviously strong and lots of people would want to buy it. Like this Sandman, I underrated it at first by a lot. It is very, very good. It lets me do these sleep sequences that other people can't do. It gives me this 4 water that the deck doesn't otherwise have and can like secure lanes that are usually difficult to secure. It can be really powerful. The Quetz unique. The Quetz unique is a 4/4/4. And I'm able to like tuck that in my hand and be like, oh ho, I have a secret 4/4/4 that's not normally available in a warrior deck. And that can like flip, it can flip like a mid-game lane where Kokoba wouldn't be online yet, or also most people don't run Kokoba. And maybe even the charge uniques wouldn't be able to flip that lane because like there's not enough stuff on the board yet. It's really early. It's just like a surprise opportunity to play an Awake Quetz on day 3 because I have a good sleeping attorney, and I see that Awake Quetz can lock up the game. So like there's a lot of cool things you can do with weaker uniques, so I really recommend the deck. And I hope that doing well shows that some of the people who are very worried about the impact of uniques don't need to worry way too much. Now, obviously, I bought a lot of sealed product to find these, even though I didn't do a singles budget. No one's saying that like you're gonna have an easy time if you open one box and don't trade with anyone, you know? But I'm really excited about the game, and I think it'll be even easier to navigate as we get the marketplace and more ability to get uniques we're interested in, more ability to, take the uniques that we're not using and get someone's other people aren't using, and really have some favorites without really having too many accessibility concerns. I definitely love to see every game feel accessible, and I think Equinox wants and expects this game to be accessible. I hope you enjoyed this video. I think this length is already pretty hearty. I was really excited about all the things I wanted to talk about, and I'm usually a little bit long-winded. The event was very well run by the staff down in Gamers Guild. If you want to shop from them, not sponsored, but they have good singles inventory and their customer service is really good. Some people have some constructive criticism about the storefront that they're still working on, but it's really good that they're promoting the game. It's really good that they put this tournament on. They have a genuine interest in promoting the game, so it's cool to shop from them and hope that the game continues to have stores that you can go to if you need to order singles and stuff. The Equinox presence at the event was really good. Both Justin Parnell and Loki Knox were there at the event. That's the North America tournament, North America organized play official, Justin Parnell, and the community organizer, Loki. They had really positive attitudes about the game and introduced lots of people to the game, like tried to bring people excitement, and they talked about like a lot of the vision that their team has. They mentioned things that their team is doing. And it definitely sounds like it's a passion project. So I really think the new sets, maybe they won't be done the way we would do them, but I think we're going to keep seeing amazing things. And I think the passion behind this game is really some of what sets it apart. I mean, like you can see on the table right here, I think these cards are like really beautiful. And one thing that really struck me when I was playing all day is that all the cards were just so good to look at. Like my opponent's cards, my cards. And I think it demonstrates a lot of passion for the game that they went out and went to some really good artists and got some really good cards for us to be looking at when we play the game. It really makes the game a joy to play. And I really had a blast all day because of all the strategy that there is in the game. Even when there's lots of blue, all the factions are designed so that there's more than one thing going on. All right, thanks for the video. Press to subscribe if you want to see any other content like this. And see you around.